Chapter 1. The cabin in the pines. The wind was a living thing, a wild, grieving spirit that wrapped itself around the little cabin in the woods, moaning through the cracks in the walls and under the door. Each gust made the old timber frame groan in protest, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my despair. I pulled my grandmother's shawl tighter, the thick, woven wool scratchy against my neck, but it offered little warmth against the chill that had seeped into my bones. It was a chill born not of the autumn storm, but of a fear so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room, a fourth occupant sharing my desperate solitude. Rain hammered the tin roof overhead, a frantic, irregular drumbeat that matched the terrified rhythm of my own heart. 3 days. It had been 3 days since I had slipped away from the noise and the light, from the suffocating expectation of the claiming ceremony. 3 days since I had traded the gilded cage of my future for this rotting, freedom-filled prison. My name is Kaylin. In the world of wolves, that name meant nothing. It was a whisper, a sigh. I was an omega, the lowest rung in our intricate, brutal hierarchy. To the alphas, we were possessions. To the packs, we were comforters, peace weavers, tools to be used and claimed. The ceremony was the mechanism of that claiming, a tradition so ancient no one dared question it. They called it a sacred bond. I saw the truth in my sister's eyes when she returned, years ago. The vibrant, fiery girl I had adored was gone, replaced by a quiet, hollow-eyed woman who flinched at sudden sounds. Her alpha had not broken her body, but he had shattered her spirit. I would rather die in this wilderness than let that happen to me. So I ran. I ran with no plan, no survival skills, just a desperate, clawing need for a life that was my own. This forgotten hunter's cabin, with its dust and its ghosts, had been my salvation. Now, as the storm raged, it felt more like a tomb. A log in the fireplace split with a soft crack, sending a shower of orange embers up into the soot-blackened chimney. The light flared for a moment, illuminating the single room, the rough-hewn table, the single rickety chair, the pile of old blankets in the corner that served as my bed. In that fleeting glow, the embroidered wolves on my shawl seemed to leap to life. My grandmother's final gift, her voice, thin and raspy with her last breaths, echoed in the silence of my mind. Take this, Kaylin. It was your great-grandmother's. She was different, like you. You must not be claimed, child. Your bloodline carries a different purpose. A heavier one. Remember, when the time comes, that hiding is not cowardice. It is the deepest form of wisdom. I traced the silver threads with a trembling finger. The wolves ran in a silent, eternal circle, forever chasing a moon they would never reach. What purpose, what wisdom was there in this paralyzing fear? I was no one. A librarian. A girl who had never felt the surge of the shift, the primal joy of running on 4 paws under the moon. I was defective, incomplete, a wolf who was only ever a woman. A sound sliced through the storm, so sudden and so close that my entire body went rigid. It was a howl, but this was not the lonely cry of a wild wolf. This was a sound of pure, undeniable power. It was deep, resonant, a note that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards and into the soles of my feet. It was a declaration of intent, a hunter's call that said, I am here. I am coming. My breath froze in my lungs, a sharp, painful block of ice. It was answered almost immediately by another, from a different direction. Then a third, closer still. They were here. A cold, sick dread washed over me, so potent I almost gagged. I scrambled away from the fireplace, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I had been so careful. I had covered my tracks, hidden my scent in streams, slept in the boughs of trees. But it had not been enough. My eyes darted around the dark cabin, searching for an escape that did not exist. The windows were small, boarded up from the inside with rotting planks. The door was the only way in or out. I was cornered. I pressed myself into the deepest, darkest corner of the room, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible. I wrapped the shawl over my head, as if the old wool could somehow hide me, could mask the scent of my terror that I knew was pouring from me. The howls had stopped, but the silence they left behind was infinitely worse. It was a listening silence, a predatory silence. Then, I heard it. The crunch of a single boot on the gravel path outside. My blood ran cold. This was not the sound of a searching party, fanning out, calling to each other. This was a slow, measured, deliberate tread. Heavy, confident. Each step was a statement of absolute authority. The footsteps did not hesitate. They did not wander. They came directly to the door of the cabin and stopped. The rain continued to patter. The wind continued to moan. But in that moment, all I could hear was the thundering of my own pulse in my ears, a frantic, desperate drumbeat counting down the last seconds of my freedom. The knock, when it came, was not loud. It was not frantic. It was 3 firm, deliberate, and devastatingly calm raps against the weathered wood of the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if by not seeing, I could make this unreal. A voice spoke from the other side of the door. It was a deep, calm baritone, and it carried an weight of command that could only belong to one man. "I know you are in there." The voice of Lysander Thorne. The Alpha King. And he was here for me. Chapter 2. The knock at the door. The sound of his voice did not fade. It lingered in the air, seeping through the cracks in the door, filling the small cabin with its impossible presence. It was not a shout. It was not a demand. It was a simple, unshakable statement of fact, and that made it more terrifying than any threat could have been. My body was a statue of ice and fear. I could not move. I could not breathe. The frantic drumming of my heart was the only sign that I was still alive, a trapped, wild thing beating itself to death against the confines of my ribs. He knew my name. He knew I was here. How? How could the Alpha King, a being so far above my station he was practically a myth, be standing outside this forgotten cabin in the middle of a storm? It made no sense. It was a nightmare from which I could not wake. "Your scent is quite remarkable." His voice came again, calm and conversational, as if we were 2 acquaintances meeting by chance on a city street. The sheer, surreal normalcy of his tone was a violation of the terror that held me captive. "It cuts through the rain and the pine," he continued, his words measured and clear. Distinct. Unforgettable. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall around me, closing off any possibility of escape. He was not trying to coax me out. He was simply informing me of the reality of the situation. "You can open this door, Kaylin, and speak with me." A tiny, foolish spark of hope flickered in my chest. Was there a chance? A chance for reason? For mercy? Or I can open it myself. The spark died, extinguished by the cold, hard truth of those words. It was not an offer. It was a delineation of power. He was granting me the illusion of choice, a final, petty autonomy before my capture was complete. "The choice of how we proceed is yours," he said, and I could almost hear the faint, condescending smile in his voice. "The outcome, however, is inevitable." Inevitable. The word echoed in the silent hollow of my mind. It was the word that had defined my life as an omega. An inevitable claim. An inevitable submission. An inevitable loss of self. I had run from that word. I had fought it with every fiber of my being, had braved the cold and the hunger and the utter loneliness to escape it. And yet, here it was, spoken by the most powerful wolf in existence, waiting for me on the other side of a thin sheet of rotting wood. A hot, sharp anger began to pierce the numb shell of my fear. It was a small flame, but it was fierce. It was the same anger that had made me run. The same anger that had sustained me for 3 days in the wilderness. I would not let them take me like this. I would not be dragged from this cabin, kicking and screaming, a broken, feral thing for the guards to mock. If this was the end of my freedom, I would meet it on my feet. I would look my captor in the eye. My limbs trembled violently as I pushed myself up from the floor. My legs felt weak, made of water and straw, but they held. I stood in the center of the dark room, the worn floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pulling the scent of dust and damp wool into my lungs. I would open the door. My grandmother's shawl slipped from my shoulders as I moved, pooling on the floor behind me. I did not stop to retrieve it. I needed no talismans now. Only my own fragile, human courage. The iron bolt was cold and heavy under my hand. The metal was rough with rust, and it scraped with a sound that seemed to scream into the quiet room as I slid it back. The noise was final. It was the sound of a gate closing, of a lock turning. It was the sound of my old life ending. I wrapped my fingers around the edge of the door. The wood was damp and rough. I could feel the vibration of the wind against it. With a final, silent prayer to a moon goddess who had never listened to an Omega like me, I pulled. The door swung inward with a groan of protest. And there he stood. Lysander Thorn, the Alpha King, was not what I had expected. The stories spoke of a giant, a warrior clad in gold and fur, with eyes that could strike a man dead. The man before me was both more and less than that. He was tall, so tall he seemed to block out the stormy night behind him. He wore simple, dark traveling clothes, soaked through by the relentless rain. Water dripped from the dark strands of his hair, which was not the regal mane of legend but fell in a wet, unruly sweep across his brow. He wore no visible crown, no jewels of office. He needed none. Power radiated from him in a palpable wave, an energy that pressed against my skin and made the air in my lungs feel thin. It was not the brute force of a bully, but the deep, unshakable authority of a mountain or a sea. It was simply there, a fact of the universe, as undeniable as gravity. But it was his eyes that truly held me captive. They were not the cold, cruel eyes I had imagined. They were a warm, startling amber, and in the deep gloom, they glowed with their own inner light. They were ancient eyes, eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, and they were now fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. They saw past my tangled hair, my dirt-smudged face, my thin, trembling frame. They saw straight into the core of me, into the fear and the defiance and the desperate, screaming question of why? He did not speak. He simply stood there, the rain sheeting down around high. And waited. My voice, when I finally found it, was a ragged, broken thing, torn from a throat tight with terror. "Do I have a true choice, Your Majesty?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was a cold, knowing thing, and it did not reach the brilliant intensity of his eyes. "There is always a choice," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the space between us. "You chose to run. I chose to follow." His gaze swept over me, from my bare feet to my wild hair, and the smile twitched again. "The quality of our current options, I will grant you, differs significantly." And without another word, he stepped forward, across the threshold, into my sanctuary. The Alpha King was in my cabin. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 3. The amber-eyed king. The cabin, which had felt so vast in my solitude, shrank to the size of a cage. Lysander Thorn did not merely occupy space, he commanded it, redefined it. The air grew thick with the scent of rain, cold earth, and something else, something wild and electric, like the air moments before a lightning strike. It was his scent, and it filled the small room, overwhelming the familiar smells of dust and pine. He closed the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. The storm was now a muffled backdrop, and in the sudden, intimate silence, the only sounds were the drip of water from his jacket and the ragged, too-quick rhythm of my own breathing. I stood frozen, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf, my earlier defiance shriveling under the sheer weight of his presence. His amber gaze swept the room in a slow, comprehensive arc. It was not a curious glance, but an assessment. He was inventorying my existence, the pathetic pile of foraged nuts and berries on the table, the worn copy of poetry I used for comfort, the rumpled blankets in the corner. Each item was noted, categorized, understood. I had never felt so exposed, so utterly laid bare. 3 days in the northern wilderness, he mused, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very wood of the walls. He did not look at me as he spoke, he was still studying my meager camp. With no training, no shifted form to protect you from the elements or the predators. He paused, and his eyes finally slid back to me, pinning me in place. That is not merely brave. It is either incredibly foolish. His head tilted slightly, and the intensity in his gaze sharpened, or indicative of a will I have rarely encountered. The words were not a compliment. They were a clinical observation, and they struck a nerve far more sensitive than any insult about my weakness could. He was seeing past the defective Omega, to the person who had dared to defy him, and it was more unnerving than any form of contempt. The heat of shame and anger returned, giving me back my voice. "I just want to be left alone," I said, the words laced with a bitterness that surprised me. "I don't want to be claimed. I don't want to be owned. Is it so impossible to understand that I want a life that is my own?" And yet, he said, turning fully to face me now, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, a king in a dripping jacket in a hovel, here I am. The frustration, the terror, the sheer absurdity of it all boiled over. Why? The question erupted from me, sharp and desperate. Why are you here? Why does the Alpha King, the ruler of 7 territories, personally track down one broken Omega? There were countless strong, powerful, worthy females at that ceremony. Females who can actually shift. Why waste your time on me? For a long moment, he was silent, his glowing eyes searching my face. The mask of regal indifference seemed to waver. Something flickered in their amber depths, not pity, but something more complex. A spark of recognition, as if he had been searching for a particular puzzle piece and had finally found it. Because you are the only one who ran, Kaelin, he said, his voice dropping, becoming quieter, more intimate, as if sharing a secret the storm was not meant to hear. The only one in a generation with the courage to spit in the eye of destiny. He took a single step closer. I flinched back instinctively, my shoulders pressing against the rough log wall. There was nowhere to go. And you are not broken, he stated, his voice absolute, leaving no room for argument. It was not a comfort, it was a correction. A redefinition of my entire being. You are something else entirely. Something forgotten. My mind reeled. Something forgotten? What did that mean? Before I could form the question, a new sound cut through the muffled storm, a loud crash from the tree line, followed by the rough, unmistakable sound of male laughter. It was a harsh, jarring noise, full of impatience and crude strength. Lysander's posture transformed in an instant. The intensity focused on me vanished, replaced by a predatory alertness. His head turned toward the window, his body coiling with a readiness that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The king was gone, replaced by the general. My royal guard, he explained, though his attention remained fixed on the darkness beyond the window. His voice was flat, devoid of its earlier nuance. They have been searching for you since you disappeared. Their methods are less nuanced than mine. He turned his head, and his gaze was hard as flint. You have until dawn. The words hung in the air, a final verdict. You will come with me willingly to the capital, and we will discuss your future. He paused, letting the alternative form in the silence between us, more potent for being unspoken. Or my guards will bring you. He took a step back toward the door, his eyes never leaving mine. I assure you, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more threatening than any shout, the latter will be a significantly less pleasant journey. My heart plummeted, a stone sinking into a frozen lake. This was it, the end of the road. That is not a choice, I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of defeat and fury. That is a threat dressed in fine words. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of what might have been respect in his ancient, weary eyes. No, he agreed quietly, his hand resting on the door latch. It is not a choice. It is a reality. His gaze held mine for one last, searing moment. But how you meet that reality, that is where your choice still lies. Then he was gone. The door closed, sealing me once more in silence. But the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of his presence, the weight of his words, and the terrifying, inexplicable notion that I was not broken. I was something forgotten. And as the sounds of the establishing camp outside began to filter through the walls, the murmur of voices, the clank of metal, the promise of my imminent captivity, that single, cryptic phrase was the only thing that kept the suffocating despair from swallowing me whole. Chapter 4. A gilded cage awaits. The click of the door latch was a sound more final than any bolt or lock. He was gone, but his presence remained, a ghost imprinted on the very air. The scent of him, rain and wild, electric power, lingered, a taunting reminder of the reality that had just shattered my fragile world. For a long time, I did not move. I stood pressed against the wall, as if his departure had stolen the strength from my limbs. The silence he left behind was profound, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. But it was a different silence now. Before, it had been my shield, my companion in hiding. Now, it was a void, filled with the echoes of his voice and the terrifying certainty of what was to come. Slowly, my legs gave way, and I slid down the rough-hewn wall until I was a heap on the cold, dusty floorboards. The tremors started then, not the violent shudders of before, but a deep, internal quaking that felt as if my very soul was rattling. I wrapped my arms around my knees, making myself small, trying to hold the pieces of myself together. You are not broken. You are something else entirely. Something forgotten. His words circled in my mind like vultures. What did they mean? What could I possibly be, other than what I had always been told I was, a flawed, incomplete Omega? Was T.S. some cruel game? A way to mock me before I was dragged back to the life I had fled? I looked across the room at my grandmother's shawl, lying in a pool of wool where it had fallen. The silver wolves seemed to gleam in the deep gloom, their silent run suddenly feeling less like a symbol of freedom and more like a portent of being forever chased. Her final warning echoed, but it offered no solace now. Hiding is not cowardice, it is wisdom. But what happened when wisdom failed? When the hunter was not just a pack enforcer, but a king who could not be outrun. The sounds from outside began to filter in, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. The casual, rough tones of male voices. The clatter of gear being unloaded. The distinct, sharp crack of dry wood being broken for a fire. They were making camp. They were settling in. There was no hurry, no concern that I might slip away. They knew, as I did, that the net was sealed. I crawled across the floor, the grit sticking to my palms, and retrieved the shawl. I pulled it around my shoulders, seeking a comfort it could no longer provide. Its weight was a burden now, a legacy of a secret I did not understand. The night stretched on, an eternity measured in the slow drip of water from the roof and the occasional burst of laughter from the guards. Each laugh was a lash against my nerves, a reminder of my powerlessness. I did not sleep. I sat in the darkness, my back against the wall, and watched the sliver of sky through a crack in the boards turn from deepest black to the murky, diluted gray of pre-dawn. As the light grew, so did the activity outside. The murmur of voices became more purposeful. I could hear the stomping of boots, the snorting of horses, the sound of a camp being efficiently dismantled. They were preparing to move. Preparing to take me. A strange calm began to settle over me, the calm of absolute resignation. The frantic fear had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not weep or beg. If I was to be a prisoner, I would be a dignified one. I stood, my body stiff and aching from the cold and the long night of tension. I folded the shawl with deliberate, slow movements, placing it neatly on the table. I ran my fingers through my tangled hair, trying to restore some order to the chaos. I splashed my face with the last of the water from my canteen, the cold shock wiping away the lingering haze of exhaustion. There was no breakfast to eat, no final ritual to perform. I simply stood in the center of the room, my backpack at my feet, and waited. I was no longer the girl hiding in the cabin. I was Kaylin, the Omega who had run from a king. And I was ready to face the consequences. A heavy fist hammered against the dew. Twice, sharp and impatient. It was not Lysander's knock. Sun's up. Time to go. A rough voice barked. I took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. The end of the road, and the beginning of another, far more dangerous one. I walked to the door, my hand pausing on the bolt. I looked back once at the empty cabin, at the cold fireplace, at the nest of blankets in the corner. It had been a prison, but it had been my prison. A place of my own choosing. Then, with a resolve that felt thin and brittle, I slid the bolt back and pulled the door open. The morning air was crisp and clean, scented with wet earth and pine. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming. And standing in the clearing, surrounded by 6 formidable royal guards and their readied horses, was Lysander Thorne. His eyes, those ancient, amber eyes, found mine immediately. He was once again the untouchable king, his damp hair brushed back, his powerful frame emanating an aura of unassailable command. He did not speak. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable, as I took the final step out of the cabin and into the gilded cage that awaited me. Chapter 5. The journey begins. The morning light was sharp and unforgiving, illuminating the scene with a brutal clarity. 6 royal guards stood in a loose semicircle, their postures relaxed yet radiating a coiled, lethal readiness. They were clad in dark, practical leathers, each face a mask of disciplined indifference. Their eyes, however, held a flicker of something else: curiosity, disdain, a predator's assessment of strange, cornered prey. And I was the prey. I stood in the cabin's doorway, the rough wood of the frame a final anchor to my lost freedom. The air was cold, but the chill that ran through me was born of the gazes fixed upon me. I forced my chin up, my shoulders back, clinging to the tattered shreds of my dignity. My eyes swept past the guards and found him. Lysander stood slightly apart, a figure of stillness amidst the quiet bustle. He had changed into dry, dark clothes that did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. He watched me, his amber gaze intense and analytical, as if studying a complex equation he had not yet solved. He offered no words of greeting, no command. He simply waited. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, stepped forward. In his hands, he held a set of heavy, dull gray manacles. The sight of them, the cold, final reality of them, sent a fresh jolt of terror through my system. "The restraints, Your Majesty," the guard said, his voice a gravelly rumble. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the humiliation I had feared. I would be chained like a criminal, a spectacle for them all. Lysander's eyes flicked from me to the manacles and then back to. Oh, my face. A long, tense moment stretched out, broken only by the call of a distant bird. "That will not be necessary," he said, his voice cutting through the morning air with quiet finality. The guard blinked, his confidence faltering. "Your Majesty? Protocol for transporting a prisoner is at my discretion," Lysander interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. His gaze returned to me, and I saw that flicker of respect again. "She rides with me." A ripple of surprise went through the guards. Their eyes darted between their king and me, reassessing, recalculating. Lysander gestured to a sleek, powerful motorcycle resting at the edge of the clearing. It was a beast of black metal and polished chrome, looking as wild and out of place in this forest as he did. "Have you ever ridden before?" he asked me. I shook my head, my voice trapped somewhere in my constricted throat. The thought of being that close to him, of hurtling through the wilderness on that machine, was a new kind of terror. "Then you will hold on," he stated, as if it were the most simple and obvious thing in the world. "It is a 6-hour journey to the capital by the road the vehicles will take. 3. The way I ride. I have matters that will not wait for your comfort." He strode toward the motorcycle, his movements fluid and assured. He swung a leg over the seat with an easy grace that spoke of long familiarity, settling into the machine as if it were a part of him. He looked back at me, expectant. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to run, to do anything but climb onto that machine and press myself against the back of the king who had hunted me. But the guards were watching, their skepticism a palpable force. To hesitate now would be to show weakness. To refuse would be to invite those manacles. With legs that felt like they were made of sand, I walked forward. The guards parted for me, their silence more accusing than any words. I reached the motorcycle, the cold metal of the handlebar seeping into my palm as I steadied myself. Lysander handed me a black helmet. "Put it on." My fingers fumbled with the strap, clumsy with nerves. The world became muted, my vision narrowed to the slit of the visor. The isolation was immediate and profound. Now, his voice was slightly muffled through the helmet, but the command was clear. "Arms around my waist. Hold tight." I hesitated for one last, rebellious second. Then, with a shuddering breath, I climbed onto the seat behind him. The position was instantly, unbearably intimate. My thighs were flush against his, my chest was forced to press against the solid, unyielding wall of his back. I tentatively wrapped my arms around his torso, my hands linking over the hard plane of his abdomen. I could feel the latent strength there, the heat of him bleeding through his clothes, a furnace contained in skin and muscle. He did not react to my touch. He simply kicked the engine to life. The roar was deafening, a mechanical snarl that vibrated up through the seat and into my very bones. It was the sound of my old life being left behind. With a sharp nod to his guards, Lysander released the brake, and the world lurched. We shot forward into the forest, weaving between trees with a speed and precision that stole my breath. The wind whipped at my clothes, a frantic counterpoint to the terrifying stillness of the man I was clinging to for my life. Trees became a blur of green and brown, the ground a dizzying rush beneath us. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my helmeted head against his back, my arms locked around him in a death grip. I was terrified of him, of the speed, of the unknown future hurtling toward me. But as the cabin and the guards vanished behind us, swallowed by the wilderness, a treacherous, wild thought surfaced through the fear. For the first time in 3 days, I was moving. And for this moment, however illusory, I was not trapped in a cabin or surrounded by guards. I was flying, and the king himself was my engine. Chapter 6. The gates of Aethelgard. Time lost all meaning. It was measured only in the relentless roar of the engine, the vibration that numbed my bones, and the constant, terrifying pressure of holding on. My arms ached, my muscles screaming in protest, but I dared not loosen my grip. Lysander was a statue before me, his body making instinctive adjustments to the terrain, a master in perfect sync with his machine. He did not speak, did not check on me. His entire focus was on the path ahead, a path that was often no path at all, just a break in the trees he seemed to sense more than see. We emerged from the dense forest onto a winding paved road that carved through the mountains. Here, he opened the throttle, and the world became a streak of color. The sheer, raw power was both terrifying and exhilarating. The wind tore at us, a constant, buffeting force, and I found myself pressing closer to his back, my face hidden, my body molding to his in a desperate bid for stability and shelter. Through the layers of our clothing, I could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. It was unnervingly calm, a stark contrast to the frantic, runaway drumming of my own. After what felt like an eternity, we slowed, pulling into a remote gas station nestled in a high mountain pass. The sudden silence when he cut the engine was almost as shocking as the noise had been. My ears rang in the void. Lysander dismounted with that same fluid ease and offered a hand to help me off. My legs buckled as my feet touched the ground, numb and uncooperative. I gripped his arm for balance. The solid muscle beneath my fingers a jolting reminder of his strength, before quickly snatching my hand back. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice sounding strangely normal after the long, wordless ride. I managed a nod, my throat too dry to speak. I was ravenous, the fear and the journey having burned through whatever reserves I had left. An elderly human attendant watched us from the door of the small station, his expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. To him, we must have looked like any other couple on a road trip, a tall, imposing man and a disheveled, shaky woman. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, a hysterical bubble rising in my chest. If only he knew. Lysander bought 2 wrapped sandwiches and bottles of water, handing one of each to me without ceremony. We did not sit. We leaned against the motorcycle, eating in a silence that was thick with unspoken words. I devoured the simple food, my eyes scanning the horizon. Miles of untamed wilderness stretched in every direction, beautiful and utterly hopeless. There was no escape here. His amber eyes watched me, missing nothing, a silent warden even in this brief respite. "Why are you doing this?" The question finally broke free, fueled by a sudden surge of courage from the food in my belly. "Why me, specifically?" He finished his sandwich, methodically wiping his hands on a napkin before answering. "You read fairy tales as a child, Kaelin?" The non sequitur caught me off guard. "Of course. Then you know," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "that every king needs a queen." I nearly choked on my water. "You can't be serious. I told you, I'm defective. I can't shift. I have no status, no family of note." "No," he interrupted, his gaze suddenly sharp and intent, pinning me in place. "I know exactly what you are." He took a step closer, and the space between us crackled with intensity. "Better than you know yourself." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air traced a path down my spine. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, he took my empty wrapper and bottle, disposed of them, and handed me the helmet once more. "We should keep moving. The guards will have taken the main highway. We won't see them again until the capital." The second half of the journey passed in a sensory blur. The majestic, snow-capped peaks and deep, pine-filled valleys were a breathtaking panorama I was too overwhelmed to truly see. My mind was consumed with his cryptic statement. "I know exactly what you are." What did he see? What hidden thing did he know that I, the one living in this body, did not? Just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we rounded a final bend. One moment, we were in the untamed wilderness. The next, we were passing through an immense, natural stone archway that seemed grown rather than built. 2 guards in polished silver armor stood at attention, bowing their heads deeply as we passed. And then I saw it. Aethelgard, the hidden capital of the werewolves. It was not a city of concrete and steel. It was a city woven into the very fabric of the mountain valley. Structures of pale stone and gleaming glass rose from the forest floor, integrated with towering trees and cascading waterfalls. A crystal-clear river wound through its heart, spanned by elegant, arched bridges. The air hummed with a quiet, powerful energy, the collective heartbeat of thousands of wolves living in a secret, sophisticated harmony with nature. It was terrifyingly beautiful, a gilded cage of unimaginable scale. Lysander did not slow to let me admire the view. He drove directly toward the center of the city, to a magnificent citadel of stone and glass that rose from an island in the middle of the river, connected to the mainland by 3 graceful bridges. The royal residence. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. This was it, my new prison. Guards snapped to attention as we approached, the gates swinging open silently. We entered a vast courtyard where fountains played and autumn flowers bloomed in defiant bursts of color. Lysander cut the engine, and the sudden quiet was deafening. He removed his helmet and ran a hand through his dark hair. I remained frozen behind him, clinging to the last moment of the journey, reluctant to dismount and make this new reality final. He turned, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Welcome to your new home, Kaelin." I finally found my voice, pulling the helmet from my head. "This isn't my home." The words came out flat, devoid of the anger I intended. "It's my prison." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That depends entirely on you." Before I could retort, the grand, carved doors of the residence swung open. A woman emerged, tall and severe, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a tight knot. She descended the steps with a predatory grace, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You're late, Lysander," she called out, her voice crisp and cool. "The council has been waiting. And you return with?" Her gaze landed on me, still perched on the motorcycle, and her lips thinned in clear displeasure. "What is this?" Lysander's voice took on a hard, formal edge. "This is Kaelin, my intended." The woman, Lady Seraphine, I would learn, stilled. Her face went through a rapid, remarkable series of adjustments: shock, disbelief, cold calculation, and finally, a mask of polished civility that was more frightening than open hostility. "I see," she said, the words dripping with frost. "How unexpected." She turned to me, her smile a sharp, bloodless thing. "I am Lady Seraph. The king's advisor in Ant. Welcome to the capital, my dear." I could only nod, the weight of my situation crashing down upon me with the force of a physical blow. Intended. The Alpha King had just declared his intention to make me, a runaway Omega, his queen. And as I met Lady Seraphine's icy, assessing stare, I knew I had just made a powerful enemy without uttering a single word. Chapter 7. The King's Advisor. The word hung in the air between the 3 of us, as tangible and sharp as shattered glass. Intended. Lady Seraphine's polished mask did not slip, but the temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop several degrees. Her eyes, a cold, flinty gray, swept over me from head to toe, taking in my wind-tangled hair, my simple, travel-worn clothes, my obvious state of shock. It was an inventory of my inadequacy. "I see," she repeated, the words coated in a thin layer of ice. "How unexpected." She turned that calculated gaze back to Lysander. "The council's patience wears thin. They require a debriefing on the border situation immediately." Lysander's posture remained rigid, his own expression unyielding. "The border can wait another hour. Have rooms prepared for Kaelin in the East Wing." "The East Wing?" Seraphine's eyebrows arched in genuine surprise, a crack in her composure. "Not the traditional quarters for a guest." "The East Wing," Lysander repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "And send Mara to attend her." A muscle twitched in Seraphine's jaw. "The East Wing is hardly suitable for an intended. The chambers are too isolated, too rustic. The Sun Wing would be more appropriate, where she can be properly integrated." I understood the subtext perfectly. The sun wing meant being watched, controlled, surrounded by his loyalists, or perhaps her spies. The east wing, for whatever reason, represented a degree of separation. A sliver of space. The east wing, Lysander said for the third time, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that even his aunt could not ignore. And inform the council I will join them within the hour. With a stiff, barely perceptible nod, Seraphine conceded. As you wish. Her eyes flicked back to me, a final, dismissive glance that promised this was not over. I will see to the arrangements. She turned and glided back up the steps, her retreat as silent and graceful as her approach. The grand doors closed behind her with a soft, definitive thud that echoed in the quiet courtyard. The moment she was gone, the tension in Lysander's shoulders eased by a fraction. He turned and offered me his hand. After a brief hesitation, I took it, allowing him to help me off the motorcycle. My legs were still unsteady, but this time it was from the emotional whiplash, not the physical journey. Your aunt doesn't approve, I stated, the obvious feeling woefully inadequate. Lysander's gaze was still fixed on the closed doors. Few will approve at first. It does not matter. It matters to me, I said, surprising myself with the boldness. The fear was beginning to curdle into a low, simmering anger. I didn't ask for this. Any of this. I don't want to be at the center of some political dispute. His amber eyes returned to me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something like sympathy in their depths. None of us ask for our fate, Kaelin. We can only choose how we face it. With those cryptic words hanging between us, he gestured toward the entrance. Mara will see you settled. He did not escort me inside himself. He turned and strode toward a different, smaller entrance, his mind already shifting to the waiting council and the border crisis. I was left standing alone in the vast courtyard, the scent of night-blooming flowers and the immense, silent presence of the citadel pressing in on me. A few moments later, a side door opened and a woman emerged. She was around my mother's age, with a kind, round face and intelligent eyes that held neither pity nor judgment. She offered a small, respectful bow of her head. Miss Kaelin? I am Mara. I am to be your attendant during your stay. If you would follow me, I will show you to your rooms. Her voice was calm and practical, a lifeline of normalcy in this surreal nightmare. I nodded mutely and followed her through the side door, leaving the opulent courtyard behind. We walked through corridors that were a marvel of artistry and nature. Walls of smooth, pale stone were interspersed with living walls of lush ferns and creeping ivy. Light streamed from cleverly hidden sources, illuminating tapestries that depicted the history of the werewolf kings. The air smelled of polished stone, old wood, and dried herbs. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly intimidating. After several turns and a climb up a wide, spiraling staircase, Mara stopped before a heavy oak door carved with a motif of oak leaves and acorns. She pushed it open and stood aside. These will be your chambers, miss. I stepped inside and stopped short, my breath catching. I had expected a cell, or at best, a sparse, functional room. This was neither. I stood in a spacious sitting room. A large, comfortable-looking sofa and chairs were arranged before a stone fireplace, where a low fire already crackled, chasing the evening's chill from the air. Thick, woven rugs in earthy tones covered the floor. But the most stunning feature was the wall of arched windows that looked out over the entire valley. The city of Aethelgard was spread out below, its lights beginning to twinkle like a field of fallen stars in the gathering dusk. The mountains stood as silent, sentinels against the deep purple sky. To the left was a doorway leading to a bedroom with a large, four-poster bed draped in deep green silk. Beyond that, I glimpsed a bathroom with a sunken tub. It's beautiful, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Mara moved to stand beside me, her hands folded neatly. It is. The east wing is the oldest part of the residence. It was built by the first kings, who valued solitude and connection to the land over opulence. She paused, then added softly, the king could have placed you in the traditional chambers for royal brides. Windowless rooms in the heart of the residence, guarded day and night until the mating ceremony. I turned to look at her, my heart thudding slowly. Why didn't he? A small, knowing smile touched her lips. That, Miss Kaelin, is a question only His Majesty can answer. She helped me settle in, showing me the wardrobe already filled with clothing in my size, a detail that was both considerate and deeply unsettling, and explaining the routines of the residence. Dinner would be brought to my rooms tonight, as the king was occupied. Tomorrow, I would be expected to join him for breakfast. After she left, I stood alone in the center of the opulent space. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I walked to the wall of windows and pressed my palms against the cool glass, looking down at the city lights. It was a gilded cage, yes. But as I stared out at the breathtaking view, a tiny, treacherous thought whispered in my mind. It was a cage, but it was one with a view of the entire world. And the king who held the key had, for reasons I could not fathom, chosen to put me here, in a wing built for solitude, rather than in a cell at the center of his power. The question echoed in the vast, quiet room, a puzzle I had no hope of solving. Why? Chapter 8. Whispers in the dark. The silence in the east wing was a living thing. It was not the empty silence of the cabin, but a deep, watchful hush, thick with the weight of history and stone. I stood for a long time at the window, watching the constellations wheel over the mountain peaks, their cold, distant light a stark contrast to the warm, inviting glow of the city below. Ethelgard was beautiful, a jewel box of a civilization, and I was trapped in its highest tower. A soft knock announced the arrival of my dinner. A young, silent attendant wheeled in a cart laden with a silver-domed platter, a carafe of water, and a single, perfect red rose in a slender vase. He left without meeting my eyes, the door clicking shut with a sound of finality. I ate at a small table by the window, the food, roasted chicken, honey-glazed carrots, warm bread, tasting like ash in my mouth. Every bite was a reminder of my powerlessness, of the system Tea provided such luxury while stripping away my freedom. The opulence was just another kind of restraint, more subtle than chains, but just as effective. After pushing the plate away, I explored the suite. The bedroom was dominated by the large bed, its dark wood posts carved with the same oak leaf motif as the door. The bathroom was a marvel of modern plumbing and ancient aesthetics, the sunken tub big enough to swim in. Everything was of the highest quality, perfectly appointed, and utterly sterile. There were no personal touches, no hints of the people who had lived here before. It was a stage set, and I was the unprepared actress shoved into the spotlight. I found myself back in the sitting room, drawn to the fire. I curled up on the rug before the hearth, pulling my grandmother's shawl from my backpack. In the flickering light, the silver wolves seemed to move, their silent chase eternal. What had she known? What secret had she died with? The shawl felt heavier now, not a comfort, but a burden of unanswered questions. A different knock sounded at the door, this one sharper, more assertive than Mara's gentle tap. My heart leapt into my throat. Had Lysander returned? "Come in," I called out, my voice unsteady. The door opened, but it was not the king. Lady Seraphine stood there, her tall frame silhouetted against the torchlight of the corridor. She had changed into a severe, high-collared gown of charcoal gray, making her look like a shard of obsidian. In her hands, she carried a small, ornate wooden box. "I thought we should have a private conversation, Miss Kalin," she said, her tone coolly professional. Woman to woman, without my nephew's interference. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the room with a barely concealed disdain before settling on me, crouched on the floor by the fire. She placed the box on the low coffee table and took a seat on the sofa, gesturing for me to join her. Reluctantly, I rose and perched on the edge of the armchair opposite her, feeling like a scolded child. "About what?" I asked, pulling the shawl tighter around me. "About your future, of course," she said, her lips curving into a thin, bloodless smile. "And the opportunity you have been presented with." She opened the box with a precise click. Nestled on a bed of black velvet lay a necklace. It was a delicate silver chain from which hung a crescent moon pendant, inlaid with tiny diamonds that caught the firelight and fractured it into 100 brilliant sparks. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly terrifying. "This," Seraphine said, "is traditionally given to the Alpha Queen on the eve of her mating ceremony. It has been worn by every queen for the past 12 generations." "It's beautiful," I said, my voice cautious. It is also," she closed the box with a sharp snap that made me jump, "never been worn by a wolf who couldn't shift." The words hung in the air, blunt and cruel. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp as daggers. "Let us be frank, Miss Kalin. You and I both know you are an impossible choice for queen. Whatever my nephew's fascination with you, it cannot override centuries of tradition and the political realities of his position." My cheeks burned with a familiar, shameful heat. But beneath the shame, that stubborn spark of anger began to glow. If I'm such an impossible choice, why did he bring me here? Seraphine's smile was a calculated, cold thing. Lysander has always had a soft spot for strays, for lost causes. But make no mistake, the council will never approve a defective queen. They will force him to choose a proper mate, someone of pure bloodline and proven strength. Her gaze intensified, boring into me. "Unless you remove yourself from the equation. You want me to leave?" I asked, incredulous. "Your nephew tracked me through miles of wilderness. Do you really think he'd just let me walk away?" "Not leave, exactly," she purred, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just withdraw your claim. Tell him you have no interest in being queen, that you recognize your limitations. He would have no choice but to release you from consideration. You could have a comfortable life, somewhere away from the pressures of court." "I never made a claim in the first place," I shot back, my anger giving me strength. "He claimed me." She waved a dismissive hand, her rings glinting. "Semantics. The point is, this can end one of two ways. Either you gracefully withdraw, preserving your dignity and securing a comfortable future, or you stubbornly persist until the council forces a humiliating rejection that leaves you with nothing." The threat was clear, but something about her urgency, her need to be rid of me now, before any council could even convene, struck me as odd. If I was such an impossible candidate, why not just let the council handle it? Why this clandestine visit, these thinly veiled threats? Before I could formulate a response, the door opened again, without a knock. Lysander stood in the doorway. He had changed into dark, formal trousers and a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired, but his expression was a mask of controlled fury as his eyes took in the scene, me, tense and defensive in the chair, Seraphine leaning forward with her predatory smile, the ornate box on the table between us. "Aunt," he said. The single word was soft, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. Seraphine rose smoothly, the box disappearing into a fold of her gown. I was merely welcoming our guest and ensuring she had everything she needed. How thoughtful, Lysander's voice could have frozen the fire in the hearth. "I'm sure Kalin appreciates your concern. But it's late, and she's had a long journey." The dismissal was unmistakable. Seraphine inclined her head in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and defiant. "Of course. Good night, Miss Kalin." Her eyes met mine one last time, a final, unspoken warning, before she glided past Lysander and out the door. He closed it behind her, the soft click echoing in the sudden stillness. For a long moment, he remained there, his back to me, his shoulders rigid. I could see the tension coiled in them, the effort it took to maintain his composure. Finally, he turned. The anger was still there, simmering in the depths of his amber eyes, but it was now directed at me, a silent demand for answers. "What did she say to you?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. I pulled the shawl tight, a flimsy shield against his intensity. "She made it clear that I'm an impossible choice for queen. She suggested I withdraw before the council humiliates me with a formal rejection." A low, primal growl rumbled in his chest, so wolf-like and unexpected that I flinched back, my heart hammering. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, coming to kneel before my chair so that our eyes were level. The proximity was overwhelming. I could see the flecks of gold in his irises, feel the heat radiating from his body. "And what did you tell her?" he asked, his voice rough with a restrained emotion I couldn't name. "Nothing," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You interrupted before I could respond." I gathered the last shreds of my courage, the question that had been burning in me since the cabin finally breaking free. "Why did you choose me, Lysander?" The truth this time, not fairy tale nonsense about kings and queens. He searched my face, his expression unreadable. "You truly don't know what you are, do you?" I shook my head, utterly bewildered. "I'm defective. A wolf who can't shift." No. The word was absolute. He took my hands in his. His touch was not what I expected. It was surprisingly gentle for someone with such immense strength. You're not defective, Kaelin. You're rare. So rare that many believed your kind extinct. My kind? The words were a breath. In the old stories, before we organized into packs and territories, there were wolves who served a different purpose. They couldn't shift because their power manifested differently. His thumbs traced slow circles on my palms, sending unwelcome, confusing shivers up my arms. They were called harmonizers, wolves who could soothe the savage instincts of alphas, heal rifts between packs, sense lies and intentions as others sense scent. I stared at him, disbelief warring with a strange, deep resonance in my soul, as if some part of me, long dormant, was stirring at his words. That's just a myth, a fairy tale, is it? He released one of my hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, silver object. He placed it in my palm. It was a brooch. A wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl, crafted from the same silver thread as the wolves on my shawl. The pose, the craftsmanship, it was identical. This belonged to the last known harmonizer, he said softly. She served as queen to my great-grandfather. Look familiar? My breath caught. This was real. The proof lay cold and heavy in my hand. The bloodline was thought lost during the territorial wars, Lysander continued, his gaze intense. Until I caught your scent at the claiming ceremony. A harmonizer's scent is distinctive to those who know what to look for. Sweet, but with an undercurrent of petrichor, rain on dry earth. My mind reeled. If this was true, it explained everything. My grandmother's warnings, the shawl, my feeling of being an outsider. If I am what you say, I said carefully, pulling my hand from his, needing space to think, why tell no one? Why let your aunt and council believe you've chosen a defective mate? A shadow crossed his face. Politics. There are those who would see a harmonizer as a threat to the current power structure. Others who would seek to control or exploit you. Until you're officially under my protection as my mate, it's safer if your true nature remains a secret between us. I stood, turning my back to him, staring into the fire. And what if I don't want to be your mate? What if I don't want this role you've decided for me? I heard him rise to his feet behind me. Then once you're trained to understand and control your abilities, you would be free to go. I turned to face him, my decision made. I'll help you, not because you need it, but because if what you say about the changing world is true, then our people need unity. As for the rest, I still need time, relief and something else, hope, perhaps, flashed in his eyes. Thank you. We begin tomorrow. He moved toward the door but paused. And Kaelin, don't let Seraphine's words trouble you. She fears what she doesn't understand. A common weakness in wolves who believe strength is measured only by fang and claw. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with a silver brooch in my palm and a head full of impossible revelations. I was not broken. I was a harmonizer, and the most powerful wolf in the world was depending on me. The weight of it was terrifying, but for the first time, it was not the weight of a prisoner. It was the weight of a purpose. Chapter 9. The first lesson. Sleep was a fleeting visitor, chased away by the storm of revelations. I lay in the impossibly soft bed, the silver brooch clutched in my hand, its cool metal a tangible anchor in the sea of my whirling thoughts. Harmonizer. The word was a key, turning in a lock I never knew existed within me. It explained the subtle ways I had always been different, the way I could sense the shifting moods in a room, the deep discomfort I felt around aggressive posturing, the reason the forced bonds of the claiming felt like such a violation. It wasn't just a moral objection, it was a fundamental dissonance in my very nature. When Mara arrived with the dawn, bringing tea and a simple, practical outfit of soft gray leggings and a blue tunic, I was already dressed and waiting by the window, the brooch pinned securely at my collar. The king awaits you in the gardens, she said, her kind eyes noting the shadows under my own but offering no comment. I followed her through the quiet corridors, the morning light painting the stone walls in shades of gold and pale rose. The residence was stirring, but an air of hushed reverence remained. We emerged onto a terrace that overlooked a part of the gardens I hadn't seen, a secluded area with a reflecting pool so still it perfectly mirrored the clear blue sky and the towering peaks beyond. Lysander stood by the pool's edge, his back to me. He was dressed more informally today, in dark trousers and a simple shirt, and yet he still commanded the space around him. He turned as we approached, his amber gaze sweeping over me, pausing for a fraction of a second on the brooch at my throat. A flicker of approval, or perhaps satisfaction, crossed his features before it was gone. "Thank you, Mara. That will be all." His voice was calm, the controlled authority back in place. Mara bowed and retreated, leaving us alone in the sun-dappled garden. The air was cool and clean, scented with damp earth and the last of the season's roses. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Hardly at all," I answered honestly. There seemed little point in pretense now. He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "It is a lot to process. That is why we will start small today." He gestured to a stone bench beside the still water. "Sit with me." I sat, leaving a careful foot of space between us on the cool stone. The pool before us was a perfect, unbroken mirror, holding the world in its tranquil grasp. "What do you know about pack bonds?" Lysander asked, his gaze fixed on the water. I frowned, reaching for lessons from a childhood that felt a lifetime away. "They're the emotional connections between pack members. Stronger between alphas and their betas, strongest between true mates. And what do they feel like to you?" He turned his head, those luminous eyes pinning me. The question was unexpected. I don't know. I've never been particularly sensitive to them." I almost said defect, but the word caught in my throat. "Another way I was different." He shook his head, a firm, decisive motion. "Not different in a failing way. Different in function. Harmonizers experience pack bonds differently. Instead of just feeling them as emotional echoes, you have the ability to see them. To understand their quality. To manipulate them. Even to sever them, if necessary." He turned fully to face me, his knee almost brushing mine. "That is what we will work on today. Learning to see what has always been there." Skepticism must have been plain on my face, for a faint, almost smile touched his lips. "Close your eyes, Kaelin." I hesitated, feeling vulnerable. "Close them," he repeated, his voice low and steady. "Focus on your breathing, just as you would if you were trying to summon your wolf." "I've never summoned my wolf," I reminded him, the old bitterness a faint echo. "The principle is the same. Quiet your mind. Feel the sun on your skin, the stone beneath you." His voice was a quiet command, impossible to resist. I let my eyelids fall shut. "Now, instead of looking inward, as wolves do when they shift, extend your awareness outward. Imagine you can see the air between us. The space itself." It felt absurd. I sat there, a grown woman with my eyes closed, trying to see the empty air. I focused on the warmth of the sun, the gentle breeze, the sound of his quiet breathing beside me. I tried to push my consciousness out, as he said, but there was nothing. Just the darkness behind my eyelids and a growing sense of foolishness. Just as I was about to give up, to tell him this was pointless, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic vision. It was a subtle change in perception, like when your eyes adjust to a dark room and shapes begin to emerge from the blackness. Between Lysander and me, stretching across that foot of empty space, was a thread of light. It was tenuous, shimmering, no thicker than a strand of spider silk, but it was unmistakably real. It glowed with a soft, golden warmth, and as I watched it in my mind's eye, I felt a corresponding flicker of connection. Not an emotion, but a potential. My gasp broke the concentration. The vision flickered and vanished. My eyes flew open. "You saw something," he said. It wasn't a question. "A thread," I whispered, my voice full of awe. "A thread of light. Connecting us." He nodded, a genuine, unguarded satisfaction lighting his features. That was a pack bond. The beginning of one. Not yet a true bond that requires acceptance on both sides, but the potential for it. My heart was pounding, but now with excitement, not fear. "And everyone has these? Between all pack members?" "Yes," he said, though they vary in strength and quality. The bonds between alphas and their packs are particularly strong. Vast networks of light that can span entire territories. Eagerly, I closed my eyes again. This time, the transition was smoother, quicker. The thin, golden thread between us reappeared, pulsing softly. But now I saw more. A complex, breathtaking web extended from Lysander in all directions. Dozens, hundreds of threads, some thick and bright as ropes, thrumming with energy, others thinner, fainter, but all interconnected in a dazzling, intricate lattice of light. It was a map of his influence, his responsibility, his connections. It was overwhelming. I can see them, I breathed, afraid to speak too loudly. Your bonds to others. They stretch out from you like a spider's web. Look beyond me, he instructed, his voice a steady guide in the visual chaos. To the residents. What do you see? I expanded my awareness, pushing it past the garden, toward the great stone citadel. And I nearly recoiled. The residence was a supernova of light. Thousands upon thousands of interconnected threads, a dizzying, impossibly complex tapestry of relationships, loyalties, loves, and hatreds. The sheer volume of information was a physical pressure behind my eyes. It was beautiful and terrifying. It's too much, I admitted, letting my eyes open, the real world rushing back in a blur of color. How does anyone make sense of it all? With practice, Lysander said, his expression the closest to openly pleased I had ever seen it. And training. What you just did, Kaelin, seeing bonds without physical contact, is something even the most skilled harmonizers typically require years to master. A warm, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in my chest. Pride. It was quickly followed by a cold splash of suspicion. I looked at him, at the king who held all the power, who had brought me here against my will. Why are you teaching me this? I asked, my voice hardening. If these abilities make me so valuable, why give me tools that might help me see a way to escape you? Something like hurt, sharp and sudden, flashed in his amber eyes. Is that all you think this is? Me keeping a valuable possession? Isn't it? I stood up, needing to put distance between us. You tracked me down, brought me here against my will, announced I would be your mate without even asking me. He rose as well, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. I did what was necessary to protect you. Do you have any idea what would happen to an untrained harmonizer discovered without the protection of a powerful alpha? You would be claimed as a prize, used for your abilities, treated as a tool rather than a person. As opposed to being treated as a prospective queen who isn't allowed to say no. I countered, my hands clenching at my sides. How is that different? Because I see you, Kael. The intensity in his voice stopped my retort cold. Not just what you can do, or what you are. I see the courage it took to run. The resilience you showed in that cabin. The determination to maintain your dignity even in captivity. He took a step closer, his gaze burning into mine. I'm not asking you to be my mate because you're a harmonizer. I'm asking because of who you are. The sincerity in his expression was disarming, unsettling. But the wound of my stolen choice was still too fresh. You still didn't ask, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only a weary ache. You announced it as a fact. A rueful smile touched his lips. Alpha habits die hard. He let out a slow breath, and to my utter astonishment, he went down on one knee before me on the stone path. He took my hand in his. Kaelin, I am asking you now. Will you consider becoming my mate? Not because of duty or ability, but because together we might build something neither of us could achieve alone. The world tilted. The Alpha King was on his knee. Before me, the runaway, the Omega. The question hung in the air, real and terrifying and utterly, profoundly shocking. I looked down at our joined hands, at the powerful fingers wrapped gently around mine. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I saw not just a king, but a man, burdened and alone, offering me a partnership. I need time, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, rising once more to his full height, the composed ruler returning. Fair enough. But his gaze shifted to something over my shoulder, his expression hardening. But time is a luxury we may not have in abundance. I turned. Lady Seraphine was approaching, accompanied by a tall, grim-faced man with silver at his temples and eyes like chips of glacial ice. Lysander, Seraphine called, her voice sweetly poisonous. The council chairman has requested an audience. I thought I might find you here, with your guest. The man beside her inclined his head a bare fraction. Your Majesty, we have matters of grave importance to discuss before this afternoon's territorial summit. Lysander's face was a mask of stone. Chairman Valerius, I was not aware we had a meeting scheduled this morning. Some concerns have arisen, Chairman Valerius replied, his cold gaze sliding to me with unconcealed contempt, that cannot wait. Concerns about recent decisions. I felt the threads of my newfound understanding begin to tremble, the golden potential threatened by a sudden, encroaching frost. The lesson was over. The game, it seemed, was just beginning. Chapter 10. The Royal Library. The air in the garden, once a haven of dappled sunlight and quiet discovery, grew thin and sharp with the arrival of Seraphine and Chairman Valerius. Their presence was a cold shadow, a reminder that my world was no longer my own. Lysander's gaze, which had moments before been filled with a startling intensity, now hardened into the impenetrable mask of the Alpha King. "I see," Lysander said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "Chairman, my aunt. I will join you shortly in the council chamber." It was a clear dismissal. Seraphine's smile was a razor's edge, but she inclined her head. Chairman Valerius offered another minute bow, his icy eyes sweeping over me one last time before they both turned and retreated the way they had come. The silence they left behind was heavy and charged. Lysander turned back to me, the ghost of our previous conversation hanging between us. "Mara will escort you to the Royal Library," he said, his tone all business once more. "There is someone you must meet. Thaddeus, the Royal Archivist. He has knowledge that will be beneficial to your understanding." He did not wait for my response. With a final, unreadable look, he strode away, following the path his aunt and the chairman had taken, his broad shoulders set against the weight of the political storm I had inadvertently caused. True to his word, Mara appeared moments later. She led me back into the residence, but this time our path took us deeper into the heart of the citadel, down wide, echoing staircases and through corridors lined with towering statues of past kings and queens. We finally stopped before a set of enormous, carved double doors made of a rich, dark wood. Mara pushed one open, and I stepped into another world. The Royal Library was not a room, it was a cavernous space that seemed to swallow sound and light. Its ceiling was a distant, vaulted expanse lost in shadow. Countless shelves, reaching up into that darkness, were crammed with books, scrolls, and manuscripts of every size and description. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and the faint, clean smell of preserving spells. Slanted rays of sunlight pierced through high, narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like ancient spirits. In the center of this vastness, at a massive desk piled high with books, sat an elderly man. He was so engrossed in a massive, leather-bound tome that he didn't hear us approach. His hair was a wispy white cloud around a deeply lined face, and he wore spectacles perched on the very end of his nose. "Master Thaddeus," Mara said softly, not wanting to startle him. The old man looked up, his eyes, magnified by his spectacles, blinking owlishly. They were a warm, watery blue, and they held a keen intelligence that belied his absent-minded appearance. "Ah, Mara. And you must be the young lady everyone is whispering about." His voice was a dry rustle, like the turning of pages. "Kaelin, is it?" "Yes, sir," I said, feeling strangely small in the face of so much accumulated knowledge. "His Majesty informed me you would be visiting. He said you have an interest in historical anomalies." His gaze was sharp, assessing. He knew exactly why I was here. "Come, sit." "Mara, thank you." Mara bowed and left us alone in the silent, watchful library. I took the wooden chair opposite him, my eyes drawn to the intricate illustrations on the open page before him. They depicted wolves, but not like any I had seen. These were surrounded by auras of light, their paws not touching the ground. "You are a harmonizer," Thaddeus stated, without preamble. It was not a question. The directness startled me. The king seems to believe so. Lysander Thorne is not a man given to belief. He is a man of evidence and instinct. And his instinct, especially concerning the old magics, is rarely wrong. He carefully closed the massive book. "Your kind were never numerous. But they were highly valued, particularly during times of great conflict. A skilled harmonizer could sense deception in an ally's heart, soothe the battle rage of an alpha, even temporarily suppress a wolf's ability to shift if the situation demanded it for the greater good." He spoke of it as if it were a historical fact, which to him, it was. But to me, it was the story of a life I might have had, a power I never knew I carried. "Is that why we were hunted?" I asked, the words my grandmother had whispered finally given voice. "Why my family had to run and hide?" Thaddeus's owlish eyes fixed on me with sudden, unnerving sharpness. Who told you that? I hesitated, the instinct to protect my grandmother's secret still strong. It seems a logical assumption. If we had such abilities, we would be a threat to those in power. The old scholar leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly. He steepled his fingers, his gaze turning inward. History, my dear child, is written by the victors. What the official records call the territorial unification, others might call by a different name entirely. My blood ran cold. He was confirming my deepest fears. The disappearance of the harmonizers wasn't a peaceful fading into history. It was a purge. The old families, the ones who consolidated power into the 7 territories we know today, saw harmonizers as unpredictable, he continued, his voice dropping. A wolf who could not be controlled by a dominant alpha's will was a dangerous concept. A power that could calm a raging heart was seen as a threat to the natural order of dominance and submission. He opened a different, smaller book, its pages brittle with age. They were not hunted like animals in the open. That would have caused an uprising. They were managed. Their numbers dwindled through strategic marriages, isolated incidents, and a rewriting of history that painted them as unstable. A myth. He pushed the book toward me. On the page was a faded illustration of a woman with serene eyes, a silver brooch identical to mine pinned to her dress. Below it, the caption read, Lyra, Queen Consort, noted for her gentle spirit and diplomatic nature. There was no mention of her being a harmonizer. Her power had been erased, reduced to a personality trait. She was the last, Thaddeus said softly. The last one to be openly acknowledged. After her, the bloodline was believed lost. Until you. I stared at the picture, my fingers tracing the cool metal of the brooch at my throat. This woman was my ancestor. Her story had been stolen from her, from us. A fierce, protective anger began to burn away the last of my confusion and fear. This was not just about my freedom anymore. It was about reclaiming a legacy that had been systematically destroyed. Why tell me this? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. If it's so dangerous? Because ignorance is a more dangerous cage than any made of stone, Kaelin, Thaddeus said, his kind eyes full of a profound sadness. Lysander is trying to break a cycle that has held our people in a stranglehold for generations. A cycle of brute strength and suppression. He needs a different kind of strength to do it. Your strength. He slid the book fully toward me. Read, learn, understand what was taken from you. It is the first step to claiming it back. I looked down at the ancient pages, at the face of the queen who shared my blood and my secret. The library, with its thousands of silent stories, no longer felt intimidating. It felt like an arsenal. And for the first time, I was beginning to understand the weapons I held. Chapter 11. A council of wolves. The following morning, Mara brought me a gown of deep emerald green, its fabric whispering of wealth and status. The king has requested your presence on the royal balcony for the opening of the territorial summit, she informed me, her hands deftly arranging my hair into an elegant twist. My stomach clenched. A public appearance. On display. Why? He did not say, Miss, she replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes held a glimmer of understanding. But the east wing overlooks the gardens. The royal balcony overlooks the great hall. It is a statement. A statement indeed. To be seen at his side, or at least in his orbit, before the assembled power of the 7 territories. I felt like a pawn being moved into position on a chessboard, yet the conversation with Thaddeus had changed my perspective. I was no longer just a captive piece, I was a piece with a hidden ability, a queen in disguise. I fastened the silver brooch to the gown's collar, a small, defiant act of claiming my own identity. Mara led me not to tea. He gardens, but to a different part of the residence, to a secluded balcony carved from the living stone of the citadel. It was a small, semicircular space hidden behind a latticed screen, offering a perfect, shadowed view of the hall below while keeping its occupants largely unseen. A spy's perch. Lysander was already there, standing in the shadows, his powerful frame silhouetted against the carved stone. He didn't turn as I entered, his attention wholly focused on the scene unfolding below. The great hall was immense, a cavern of power. Its floor was a mosaic of the 7 territories, and its walls were lined with banners bearing the sigils of the great Alpha families. The air hummed with a low, potent energy, the collective force of dozens of the most powerful wolves in the world. They were all there. The 7 territorial alphas, each a ruler in their own right, surrounded by their betas and advisors. I saw the massive, bear-like alpha of the northern Frostfang pack, his beard braided with iron rings. I saw the sleek, dangerous alpha of the southern Sunstalkers, her eyes missing nothing. They were a spectrum of power and pride, and the tension between them was a live wire, crackling even from this distance. Observe, Lysander's voice was a low murmur, meant only for me. Do not listen to their words. Watch their bonds. He had known. He had known the sight in the garden was just the beginning. He was asking me to use my new, fledgling ability in the heart of the political beast. I took a steadying breath and closed my eyes, just as I had in the garden. It was harder here. The sheer volume of aggressive, dominant energy was a chaotic roar in my senses. I pushed through it, focusing on the technique he had taught me, extending my awareness downward. The world dissolved into light. It was breathtaking and terrifying. The Great Hall was not a room of wolves, it was a nebula of interconnected stars. Thick, brilliant cords of gold and white connected Lysander to each of the 7 alphas, the bonds of fealty, strong but, I could now see, strained. Some threads were vibrant and steady, like the one connecting him to a stern-faced alpha with a hawk-like gaze. Others were thinner, flickering with hints of orange and red, the colors of frustration and resentment. But it was the web between the alphas themselves that was most revealing. A complex, shifting tapestry of alliances and rivalries. Some bonds were strong and cooperative, threads of bright blue and loyal green woven tightly together. Others were mere, wispy filaments of gray mistrust. And between a few, there were jagged, pulsing cords of deep crimson, active animosity. Lysander began to speak, his voice resonating through the hall with calm authority. He spoke of unity, of a changing world, of the need for a formal alliance with the human governments to secure their future. As he spoke, I watched the bonds. The hawk-eyed alpha's connection to Lysander glowed brighter, a thread of unwavering support. But the Frostfang alpha's bond flickered, the red streaks within it intensifying. His own bond to the Sunstalker alpha, a thin, tense line, practically vibrated with hostility. When the Sunstalker alpha stood to voice a concern about losing our predatory edge, a jagged bolt of crimson shot from the Frostfang alpha toward her, a silent, psychic snarl of agreement for all the wrong reasons. They were not listening to the argument's merit. They were reacting to ancient feuds, to personal pride, to fear. Lysander's logical, forward-thinking proposal was being shredded on the invisible battlefield of their tangled histories and fragile egos. I saw it then, with a clarity that was as humbling as it was horrifying. The true resistance wasn't to the idea itself. It was to the change it represented. It was to the weakening of their individual power bases. It was to the fear of the unknown. Chairman Valerius, seated at the high table, had a bond to Lysander that was a complex, murky gray, shot through with veins of cold, calculating yellow. He was not an enemy, but he was not an ally. He was a strategist, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. I opened my eyes, the real world snapping back into focus. The vibrant web of light vanished, leaving behind the grim-faced alphas and the echoing tension in the hall. Lysander was watching me now, his amber eyes questioning. "They're not listening to you," I whispered, the truth of it chilling me. "The Frostfang and Sunstalker alphas are so bound by their own rivalry they're using your proposal as another weapon against each other. Valerius is waiting to see who blinks first. Only one, the one with the hawk's gaze, truly hears you." Lysander's jaw tightened. He hadn't needed my confirmation, but having the invisible map laid bare seemed to both frustrate and satisfy him. "His name is Theron, Alpha of the Ironwood Pack. He has always been a staunch ally." He looked back down at the fractious council. "And the others? They are a knot of fear and pride," I said softly. "You're not fighting a political battle. You're fighting 1,000 years of instinct." For a long moment, he was silent, watching the discord below. Then he said, "This is why I need you, Kalen. Not as a tool, but as a translator for a language I have only ever been able to feel, but never truly read." He turned and left the balcony, descending to re-enter the fray, armed now with the knowledge I had given him. I stayed for a while longer, watching the powerful wolves below, seeing not just their faces and gestures, but remembering the flawed and fragile web of light that connected them. I was no longer just a runaway Omega. I was the only one in the room who could see the cracks in the foundation of the entire werewolf world. And the weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders, heavier than any chain. Chapter 11. A Council of Wolves. The following morning, Mara brought me a gown of deep emerald green, its fabric whispering of wealth and status. "The king has requested your presence on the royal balcony for the opening of the territorial summit," she informed me, her hands deftly arranging my hair into an elegant twist. My stomach clenched. A public appearance. On display. "Why?" "He did not say, miss," she replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes held a glimmer of understanding. "But the east wing overlooks the gardens. The royal balcony overlooks the great hall. It is a statement. A statement indeed. To be seen at his side, or at least in his orbit, before the assembled power of the 7 territories." I felt like a pawn being moved into position on a chessboard, yet the conversation with Thaddeus had changed my perspective. I was no longer just a captive piece, I was a piece with a hidden ability, a queen in disguise. I fastened the silver brooch to the gown's collar, a small, defiant act of claiming my own identity. Mara led me not to the gardens, but to a different part of the residence, to a secluded balcony carved from the living stone of the citadel. It was a small, semicircular space hidden behind a latticed screen, offering a perfect, shadowed view of the hall below while keeping its occupants largely unseen. A spy's perch. Lysander was already there, standing in the shadows, his powerful frame silhouetted against the carved stone. He didn't turn as I entered, his attention wholly focused on the scene unfolding below. The great hall was immense, a cavern of power. Its floor was a mosaic of the 7 territories, and its walls were lined with banners bearing the sigils of the great Alpha families. The air hummed with a low, potent energy, the collective force of dozens of the most powerful wolves in the world. They were all there. The 7 territorial alphas, each a ruler in their own right, surrounded by their betas and advisors. I saw the massive, bear-like alpha of the northern Frostfang pack, his beard braided with iron rings. I saw the sleek, dangerous alpha of the southern Sunstalkers, her eyes missing nothing. They were a spectrum of power and pride, and the tension between them was a live wire, crackling even from this distance. "Observe," Lysander's voice was a low murmur, meant only for me. "Do not listen to their words. Watch their bonds." He had known. He had known the sight in the garden was just the beginning. He was asking me to use my new, fledgling ability in the heart of the political beast. I took a steadying breath and closed my eyes, just as I had in the garden. It was harder here. The sheer volume of aggressive, dominant energy was a chaotic roar in my senses. I pushed through it, focusing on the technique he had taught me, extending my awareness downward. The world dissolved into light. It was breathtaking and terrifying. The Great Hall was not a room of wolves, it was a nebula of interconnected stars. Thick, brilliant cords of gold and white connected Lysander to each of the 7 alphas, the bonds of fealty, strong but, I could now see, strained. Some threads were vibrant and steady, like the one connecting him to a stern-faced alpha with a hawk-like gaze. Others were thinner, flickering with hints of orange and red, the colors of frustration and resentment. But it was the web between the alphas themselves that was most revealing. A complex, shifting tapestry of alliances and rivalries. Some bonds were strong and cooperative, threads of bright blue and loyal green woven tightly together. Others were mere, wispy filaments of gray mistrust. And between a few, there were jagged, pulsing cords of deep crimson, active animosity. Lysander began to speak, his voice resonating through the hall with calm authority. He spoke of unity, of a changing world, of the need for a formal alliance with the human governments to secure their future. As he spoke, I watched the bonds. The hawk-eyed alpha's connection to Lysander glowed brighter, a thread of unwavering support. But the Frostfang alpha's bond flickered, the red streaks within it intensifying. His own bond to the Sunstalker alpha, a thin, tense line, practically vibrated with hostility. When the Sunstalker alpha stood to voice a concern about losing our predatory edge, a jagged bolt of crimson shot from the Frostfang alpha toward her. a silent, psychic snarl of agreement for all the wrong reasons. They were not listening to the argument's merit. They were reacting to ancient feuds, to personal pride, to fear. Lysander's logical, forward-thinking proposal was being shredded on the invisible battlefield of their tangled histories and fragile egos. I saw it then, with a clarity that was as humbling as it was horrifying. The true resistance wasn't to the idea itself. It was to the change it represented. It was to the weakening of their individual power bases. It was to the fear of the unknown. Chairman Valerius, seated at the high table, had a bond to Lysander that was a complex, murky gray, shot through with veins of cold, calculating yellow. He was not an enemy, but he was not an ally. He was a strategist, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. I opened my eyes, the real world snapping back into focus. The vibrant web of light vanished, leaving behind the grim-faced alphas and the echoing tension in the hall. Lysander was watching me now, his amber eyes questioning. "They're not listening to you," I whispered, the truth of it chilling me. "The Frostfang and Sunstalker alphas are so bound by their own rivalry they're using your proposal as another weapon against each other. Valerius is waiting to see who blinks first. Only one, the one with the hawk's gaze, truly hears you." Lysander's jaw tightened. He hadn't needed my confirmation, but having the invisible map laid bare seemed to both frustrate and satisfy him. "His name is Theron, Alpha of the Ironwood Pack. He has always been a staunch ally." He looked back down at the fractious council. "And the others? They are a knot of fear and pride," I said softly. "You're not fighting a political battle. You're fighting 1,000 years of instinct." For a long moment, he was silent, watching the discord below. Then he said, "This is why I need you, Kaelin. Not as a tool, but as a translator for a language I have only ever been able to feel, but never truly read." He turned and left the balcony, descending to re-enter the fray, armed now with the knowledge I had given him. I stayed for a while longer, watching the powerful wolves below, seeing not just their faces and gestures, but remembering the brilliant, flawed, and fragile web of light that connected them. I was no longer just a runaway Omega. I was the only one in the room who could see the cracks in the foundation of the entire werewolf world. And the weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders, heavier than any chain. Chapter 12. A moment of truth. The scent of rain and night-blooming jasmine filled the rooftop garden, a stark contrast to the stifling political tension I had witnessed hours before. Lysander had summoned me here after the summit's first day had concluded, the silence between us as we ascended the stairs heavier than any spoken word. He stood by a small reflecting pool, his back to me, his shoulders etched with a fatigue that was more than physical. The starlight silvered his dark hair, and for a moment, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a man carrying the weight of 7 territories on his back. "You were right," he said, his voice quiet in the hushed night. "About the alphas. About the fear." He turned, his amber eyes capturing the starlight. Theron held firm. "The others?" He let out a short, frustrated breath. "The alliance is fraying before it's even been voted on." I remained by the garden entrance, the delicate arch of moonlit vines framing me. "You brought me here to tell me that?" "No." He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if remembering the space I needed. "I brought you here because this is the only place in the entire citad where I feel I can breathe. And because I owe you the truth you asked for." He gestured to a stone bench nestled between 2 fragrant shrubs. I sat, and he took a place at the far end, the space between us a tangible, careful boundary. "Tomorrow is the final day," he began, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted water of the pool. "The alliance vote. I proposed it because the world is changing, Kaelin. Technology makes it harder each year to remain completely hidden. Better to control the terms of our emergence than be discovered unprepared, triggering a war we cannot win. And the council opposes you," I stated, the memory of Chairman Valerius's cold, calculating bond vivid in my mind. "My aunt and her allies fear change above all else," he confirmed, a bitter edge to his voice. "They would have us cling to isolation until humans stumble upon us with cameras and weapons, forcing a confrontation. They are willing to risk annihilation for the sake of tradition." He finally looked at me, his expression stark in the moonlight. "I need a unified front tomorrow. All 7 alphas in agreement. Without it, the proposal fails, and we remain on a path that leads to a cliff's edge." Understanding, cold and clear, settled in my stomach. And that's why you need me. A harmonizer could help secure that unity. My abilities could persuade the alphas to see past their fear. He didn't deny it. Yes. The word was blunt, honest. Your presence alone has a calming effect. Your abilities, focused, could be instrumental in helping them see the larger picture, past their immediate pride and prejudices. I stood up, the emerald silk of my gown whispering against the stone. The anger that flared was cleaner now, purer than before, stripped of confusion and fueled by a profound sense of manipulation. So that's what this has really been about. Not protection. Not some fairy tale about seeing the real me. You need a tool for your political agenda. You didn't even know I existed until the claiming ceremony, and then suddenly I'm your destined mate, worthy of a king's personal attention. How convenient that I also happen to possess abilities you desperately need at this precise moment in history. Strong hands gripped my shoulders, turning me to face him. The contact was electric, jolting. You think I orchestrated this? That I somehow arranged for a harmonizer to appear just when I needed one? His eyes blazed, the gold flecks within them glowing. Do you know how rare your kind is? The last confirmed harmonizer died over 80 years ago. When I caught your scent at that ceremony, it was like finding a ghost. A legend I'd read about but never, ever expected to encounter. His nearness was overwhelming, the heat of his body a brand through the fabric of my gown. Then Hi, didn't you approach me openly? Why let me run? Politics, he admitted, his grip on my shoulders gentling but not releasing. And your safety. If the council knew what you were before I had secured your position, they would have moved against you. They would have seen you as a threat to be eliminated or a prize to be controlled. And yes, I need your help tomorrow. But that doesn't mean my other reasons for wanting you here were false. I searched his face, in the stark, honest light of the moon, looking for the deception I feared. I saw frustration, yes. The weight of a kingdom. But I also saw a raw, startling vulnerability I had never seen in him before. You're stronger than you realize, he said, his voice dropping, one hand moving to gently cup my cheek. The touch was shockingly intimate, a contrast to his earlier intensity. I've watched you. I've seen you face terror and refuse to break. I've seen you grasp a power in days that takes most years to master. You are not a tool, Kaelin. You are a force. His palm was warm against my skin, his thumb resting lightly on my jawline. Despite my anger, despite the fear, I couldn't deny the connection that had been growing between us, a thread of understanding, of shared burden, that had nothing to do with politics or power. And if I help you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, what then? What happens to me after you've secured your alliance? Lysander's thumb traced a gentle line along my jaw, his expression more open than I had ever seen it. Then I would still want you as my mate. My queen. Not for your abilities, but for this. His other hand pressed lightly over my heart, the touch searing through the silk. Your courage. Your questioning mind. Your refusal to be cowed, even by an alpha king. The sincerity in his voice was a physical force, compelling and terrifying. And if I said no? I asked, the words a whisper. If I helped with your alliance, but declined to be your mate? Pain, sharp and unguarded, flickered in his eyes, but he nodded slowly. Then I would honor that choice, though it would grieve me deeply. You would have a place here, protection, resources, freedom to develop your abilities. But no obligation to me beyond what you freely give. It was the first time he had explicitly offered me a choice. A future I could shape. The acknowledgement of my agency, belated though it was, loosened something tight and fearful within my chest. I'll help tomorrow, I said finally, pulling away from his touch, needing the space to think clearly. The loss of his warmth was immediate. Not because you need it. But because if what you say about the changing world is true, then isolation is dangerous for all our kind. For omegas, for betas. For everyone. I took a step back toward the garden exit. As for the rest, I still need time. Relief and a fragile hope warred in his expression. Thank you. The summit convenes at midday. Mara will help you prepare. I nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Kaelin. I looked back. He stood where I had left him, bathed in starlight, a king in a quiet garden. "Whatever you decide about us," he said, his voice low and earnest, "know that meeting you has changed me." He offered a faint, weary smile. Perhaps that is the true power of a harmonizer. Not the manipulation of bonds, but the transformation of hearts. His words followed me down the winding staircase, echoing in the silent corridors. For the first time since he had appeared at the cabin door, the path before me didn't feel like a prison corridor. It felt like a crossroads. And the choice, terrifyingly, was finally becoming my own. Chapter 13. The shadow weaves. The morning of the vote dawned with a deceptive calm. Sunlight streamed into my sitting room, painting warm rectangles on the rug. Mara arrived, not with my usual simple attire, but with a gown of deep sapphire blue, its fabric rich and heavy. Silver embroidery, reminiscent of swirling wind, traced the hem and sleeves. "His Majesty had this commissioned for you," she said, her voice holding a note of quiet pride. "He described your grandmother's shawl to the seamstress." The gesture was so unexpectedly personal it stole my breath. He hadn't just ordered a dress, he had tried to connect it to the one piece of my past I held dear. As Mara helped me into it, the gown felt less like a uniform and more like armor, beautifully crafted and uniquely mine. I pinned the silver brooch at my shoulder, the ancient wolf a silent declaration of the heritage I was only beginning to embrace. When I was ready, I looked in the mirror. The woman who stared back was not the terrified girl from the cabin, nor the shocked captive from the courtyard. Her eyes were clear, her posture straight. She looked like she belonged in the sapphire gown, in these stone halls. The realization was as frightening as it was empowering. Mara led me to the antechamber outside the great hall. The air here thrummed with a different energy than the day before, sharper, more final. Lysander was waiting, dressed in his formal regalia, a silver chain of office across his chest. He turned as I entered, and his eyes, for a fleeting moment, showed pure, unguarded appreciation before the mask of the king slid back into place. "You are wearing the brooch," he said, his voice rough. "It seemed appropriate," I replied, touching it. "A reminder of what I am, and what I might become." He crossed the room and took my hands in his. His were warm, solid. "Are you ready? Once we enter that hall, there is no turning back. The Alphas will know what you are. The Council." His expression darkened. "They suspect already. My aunt has seen to that. But they cannot move against you openly, not with all 7 territorial Alphas as witnesses." I took a deep breath, centering myself as he had taught me. "What exactly do you need me to do?" "Observe," he said, his thumbs brushing over my knuckles, a strangely comforting gesture. "Watch the bonds. Look for the moment of fracture, the core of the resistance. Your presence will have an effect. Harmonizers naturally ease tension. But I need you to be my eyes. Help me understand where to apply pressure, where to offer reassurance." "Is that all I am to you?" The question slipped out, half a jest to cut the tension. "A natural sedative for aggressive wolves?" His response was utterly serious, his amber eyes holding mine with a startling vulnerability. "You were the missing piece I didn't know I needed, Kaelin. The strength I never thought to find." Before I could process his words, a deep gong sounded from within the great hall, its resonance vibrating through the stone floor. The doors were about to open. Lysander straightened, his hand lingering on mine for a second longer. "It's time." As we approached the massive double doors, I squared my shoulders and raised my chin. I was not a captive, not a tool. I was Kaelin, a harmonizer, and I was walking into the heart of my people's power to help shape its future. The doors swung inward, revealing the packed, silent hall. Every eye turned to us. The 7 Alphas at their table, the council members, the assembled nobles and warriors. A wave of scrutiny hit me, a pressure of 100 dominant wills. I felt my newfound confidence waver. Then, a voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking from the crowd of onlookers. It was one of Seraphine's allies, a councilman with a sneering mouth. "See how our king parades his pet Omega. Perhaps she will sing for us and calm our savage hearts before the vote." A ripple of nervous laughter went through his faction. My cheeks burned. I saw Lysander's jaw clench, a storm gathering in his eyes. But as the insult landed, something shifted inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it was met by a cool, clear wave of understanding. I didn't need to close my eyes. I simply looked, and I saw it. The web of light, more complex and volatile than yesterday. The bonds of the supportive alphas flared in indignation at the insult. The bonds of the opposition pulsed with smug satisfaction. And from the sneering councilman, a thin, venomous thread of black energy shot toward me, not a bond, but an attack, an attempt to shame, to diminish. Without thinking, I met it. Not with aggression, but with a gentle, firm push of my own will, a ripple of calm certainty. I didn't block the insult, I dissolved its power. The councilman's smirk faltered. He blinked, as if confused, the clever retort he'd prepared dying on his lips. The nervous laughter sputtered out. In the sudden, profound silence, my voice, clear and steady, rang out. I am Kalen, I said, my gaze sweeping the room, not in challenge but in simple statement. And I am here not to sing, but to listen. Perhaps if we all listened more, we would hear the future knocking at our door. I hadn't planned the words. They simply came, flowing from that same place of calm certainty. A hush fell over the great hall. The alphas were staring at me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to a dawning, unsettled recognition. They felt it, the shift in the air, the easing of the aggressive tension. They didn't know what I was, but they felt what I did. Lysander looked down at me, and in his eyes, I saw not just approval, but a deep, profound wonder. The doors to the great hall closed behind us with a definitive thud. The vote would proceed, but as I took my seat beside the king, the balance of power in the room had already, irrevocably, changed. The shadow of doubt Seraphine had tried to cast had been met not with a shadow, but with a light. And for the first time, I felt not like a pawn, but like a player who had just made her first, decisive move. Chapter 14. The howl of the pack. The silence in the great hall was a taut wire, vibrating with the aftermath of my words and the unsettling calm I had projected. Lysander took his seat at the head of the table, and I was given a chair slightly behind and to his right, a position that was neither subservient nor equal, but uniquely, ambiguously mine. I could feel the weight of hundreds of gazes, but I kept my focus on the web of light only I could see. The debate began again, but the tenor had changed. The undercurrent of petty sniping was gone, replaced by a more substantive, if still tense, discussion. I watched the bonds, my senses stretched thin as I tried to follow the complex interplay of light and emotion. Alpha Theron of the Ironwood Pack spoke with steadfast logic, his bond to Lysander a steady, brilliant gold. The Frostfang Alpha, Borin, grumbled about tradition, the red streaks in his bond flaring with each mention of human contamination. The Sunstalker Alpha, Anya, countered him with sharp pragmatism, their mutual crimson thread of animosity pulsing like an angry vein. It was Chairman Valerius who struck the most dangerous chord. He rose, his expression one of grave concern. Your Majesty, he began, his voice smooth as oil, his bond to Lysander a murky, calculating gray. We all appreciate the calming influence your guest provides. His eyes flicked to me, cold and dismiss. But we must be cautious. This proposal asks us to trust those who have historically been our hunters. It asks us to lower our guard, to dilute our nature. Can we truly trust a peace bought with such a fundamental compromise? Or are we being lulled into a false sense of security? His words were a masterstroke, tapping directly into the core fear I had identified. The bonds of the undecided alphas flickered with new uncertainty, tinged with the yellow of fear. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low, for Lysander's ears only. He's not arguing against the alliance. He's arguing against trust itself. He's feeding their deepest fear, that they will be weakened and betrayed. Lysander gave a barely perceptible nod. He stood to respond, his voice calm but firm, trying to dismantle the fear-based argument with reason. But Seraphine saw her opening. As Lysander spoke, she rose gracefully from her place on the council dais. My nephew speaks of trust in outsiders, she said, her voice syrupy with false concern. But perhaps we should look closer to home for the source of our unease. All eyes turned to her. She smiled, a slow, cruel thing. This young woman, Kalen. An omega who cannot shift. A nobody from a nameless pack. And yet, she wields an influence over this assembly that is uncanny. She speaks, and seasoned alphas fall silent. She enters a room, and tensions ease. Tell me, does that not strike anyone as strange? Dangerous, even? She was twisting my gift into a weapon. Painting me as a manipulator, a siren luring them into a trap. I have done nothing but speak my mind, I said, standing my ground, though my heart was pounding. Have you? Seraphine's eyes gleamed. What of Elias, one of the royal guards? Found yesterday evening in a state of confused agitation, unable to clearly recall his duties. He was on duty outside the East Wing. Your wing. She turned to the assembly. Is this the power we are inviting into our council? A power that can cloud the mind of a loyal guard? It was a lie. A brilliant, malicious lie. I had done no such thing. But the seed of doubt was sown. The bonds in the room churned with suspicion, the colors darkening. I saw the flicker of uncertainty even in Theron's steady gold thread. Panic clawed at my throat. This was it. The humiliating rejection Seraphine had promised. I was being framed, my abilities distorted into a monstrous threat. Lysander was on his feet, his fury a palpable heat. You have no proof of this, aunt. Only baseless insinuation. The proof is in the effect, nephew. Look at them. She gestured wildly at the alphas. She has them under her spell. The room erupted into chaos. Alphas were shouting, some in my defense, most in fear and outrage. The beautiful, fragile web of light was tearing itself apart in a maelstrom of crimson and black fear. I stood there, cornered, the angry voices washing over me. I felt the bonds straining, snapping. And in that moment of utter despair, something in me broke. Not in weakness, but in a surge of pure, defiant will. I didn't try to soothe them. I didn't try to calm the storm. I showed it to them. I closed my eyes for a single, focused second, and then I pushed my awareness out, not as a gentle wave, but as a clarion call. I took the chaotic, tangled, brilliant web of their bonds, the loyal gold, the hostile crimson, the fearful yellow, the calculating gray, and I reflected it back at them. I didn't manipulate it. I made it visible to their primal senses. A collective, sharp gasp echoed through the hall. The shouting ceased abruptly. They couldn't see it as I did, but they felt it. They felt the stark, undeniable truth of their own connections and deceptions. The Frostfang Alpha flinched back from the Sunstalker Alpha, as if burned by the raw hatred between them. Chairman Valerius paled, his hand going to his chest as he felt the cold, self-serving nature of his own loyalty exposed. They were feeling the invisible architecture of their own politics, and it was an ugly, shocking mirror. In the dead silence, my voice was the only sound, calm and clear as crystal. You feel that? I asked, my gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. That is the truth you have been ignoring. The alliances, the hatreds, the fears. That is what is truly deciding this vote. Not the safety of our people. Not the future of our kind. Your own tangled history. I turned my eyes to Seraphine, who was staring at me with a mixture of horror and rage. And you would use fear of me to keep it all hidden. Because the one thing you truly fear is the light. I looked at Lysander. His expression was one of awe and grim triumph. The spell broke. The alphas were shaken to their cores, forced to confront the reality I had revealed. The vote was no longer an abstract political exercise. It was a choice about what kind of wolves they wanted to be. The hall remained utterly silent, the air thick with the aftermath of the psychic earthquake I had just unleashed. The path forward was broken open, but it was littered with the rubble of shattered illusions. And I, the quiet Omega from the woods, stood at the center of it all. Chapter 15. An unbreakable thread. The silence in the great hall was deeper than any that had come before. It was not the quiet of anticipation or respect, but the stunned, profound hush that follows a cataclysm. The air itself felt charged, thick with the psychic residue of the bonds I had so violently made them feel. The alphas, the council members, the nobles, all sat or stood frozen, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a kind of terrified awe. They had looked into the heart of their own world and had not liked what they saw. I stood my ground, my chest heaving, the sapphire gown feeling less like armor now and more like a heavy weight. The surge of power was receding, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. I had done it. I had torn back the veil. And I had no idea what would happen next. Lysander was the first to move. He did not look at the stunned assembly. His gaze was fixed solely on me, and in his amber eyes was a look I could not decipher. a mixture of fierce pride, deep concern, and something else, something raw and unguarded. He took a single step toward me, a silent question in his expression. "Are you all right?" I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, my legs feeling like they might buckle at any moment. It was Alpha Theron who broke the spell. The hawk-faced Alpha of the Ironwood pack rose slowly to his feet. He did not look at Seraphine or the scowling Frostfang Alpha. He looked at me, his expression grave, and then he turned to Lysander. "I have served this crown for 40 years, he said, his voice rough but clear in the absolute silence. "I have followed you, Lysander, because I believed in your vision. A vision of strength through unity." His sharp eyes scanned the other alphas. "What we felt here today, that was not unity. That was the rot of old hatreds and personal ambition, threatening to consume us from within." He placed a fist over his heart. "The Ironwood pack votes aye for the Alliance. Not because we trust the humans, but because we must first learn to trust each other again. And it seems," his gaze returned to me, and he gave a slow, respectful nod. "It seems we have been given a chance to see ourselves clearly." One by one, the other alphas began to stir. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a grim, sober reckoning. The Sunstalker Alpha, Anya, stood next. "The Sunstalkers vote aye," she said, her voice clipped. She shot a venomous look at Borin of the Frostfangs. "Some of us have been trying to move forward for generations." Borin, the massive Frostfang Alpha, glowered, his face a thundercloud. The crimson thread of his animosity toward Anya still pulsed, but it was now tangled with the gray of shame and the dawning yellow of fear of being left behind. He grunted, a low, animal sound. "The Frostfangs vote aye." It was a surrender, forced and grudging, but it was a surrender all the same. The dominoes fell. The remaining alphas, their pride wounded but their eyes opened, gave their assent. The vote was unanimous. The alliance had passed, but the victory felt hollow. The hall began to empty, the alphas and their retinues filing out in stunned silence, none looking at each other, each lost in the uncomfortable truth of what they had discovered about themselves and their neighbors. Seraphine was one of the first to leave, her back rigid with fury, her plot utterly demolished. Chairman Valerius followed, his face an unreadable mask, but the murky gray of his bond to Lysander was now shot through with a new, wary respect. Soon, only Lysander and I remained in the vast, echoing hall. The silence returned, but now it was a private thing, shared between the two of us. He walked toward me, his footsteps echoing on the mosaic floor. He stopped an arm's length away, his eyes searching my face. "What you did," he began, his voice low and hushed. "I have never seen anything like it. You didn't just win a vote, Kaelin. You performed surgery on the soul of this nation." "I showed them the truth," I said, my own voice tired. "I don't know if they will thank me for it." "They may not," he agreed. "But it was necessary." He was silent for a long moment, studying me. "You have your answer now. The alliance is secured. The immediate threat is past." I knew what he was saying. The political necessity that had driven him to bring me here was fulfilled. The bargain, as he had originally seen it, was complete. "So," I said, wrapping my arms around myself, "what happens to the tool now that the job is done?" A flash of pain crossed his features. "Is that still what you believe you are to me?" He took a half-step closer, closing the distance between us. "After everything that has just happened? After you stood in the heart of a storm of your own making and did not flinch?" He reached out, but he did not touch me. His hand hovered in the space between us, an offering. "The choice I offered you on the rooftop stands. More so now than ever. You are free to go, Kaelin. I will provide you with everything you need, a home, resources, protection. You can live your life away from all of this, and no one, not even I, will trouble you again." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment I had fought for, run for, dreamed of. True freedom. A life of my own choosing. But as I looked at his outstretched hand, I didn't see my captor. I saw the man who had knelt in a garden. The king who carried the weight of a world on his shoulders. The partner who had trusted me with his most vulnerable truth. "Or," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, raw with a hope he could no longer conceal, "you can stay." His amber eyes held mine, and in their depths, I saw not a demand, but a plea. Stay not as an omega, or a harmonizer, or a political asset. Stay as my equal, my partner. The queen this kingdom does not yet know it needs. Help me build the future we just fought for. Help me heal the fractures you revealed. I looked from his eyes to his hand, suspended in the air between us. It was a choice. A real, true, terrifying choice. I thought of the lonely cabin in the woods, the silence of a life lived in hiding. And I thought of the dazzling, painful, vital web of light that connected this entire citadel, this entire people. A web I could now see, and understand, and perhaps help to mend. The runaway Omega was gone. In her place was a woman who had stared into the heart of power and found her own. I did not take his hand. I met his gaze, my own resolve solidifying, my voice clear and steady in the empty hall. No. His face fell, the hope in his eyes extinguished so completely it was like a light going out. He began to lower his hand. No, I repeated, taking a step forward, closing the final distance myself. I will not stay as your equal. I reached out and placed my hand in his. His fingers were warm and strong, and they closed around mine with a shock of certainty. I will stay, I said, as your queen. For a moment, he was utterly still, as if he dared not believe what he had heard. Then, a slow, true smile broke across his face, transforming his weary, regal features into something younger, brighter, filled with a profound and devastating relief. It was the first real, unguarded smile I had ever seen from him. Then we will build it together, he whispered, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Above us, through the high, arched windows, the moon began to rise, its pale light spilling across the mosaic floor, illuminating the path before us. The path was not towards a gilded cage, but towards a throne. And for the first time, I was not being led. I was choosing to walk.